Hi everyone. So let's resume to our Aeon topic, Dream to the Russian tropics. So where we are, yeah, we need to start from this series. Set- Settlers from the metropole would cultivate whimsical plants for aesthetics pleasures and commodities. So let's see what this series holds for us. So let's start with the first species. The bringing of the Chinese was preceded by the heated discussions about the practicability of such a move, which betrayed acute racialized concern among the Russian commentators. The phantom of the yellow peril, well entrenched in the mindset of Tsarist society at the turn of the century, and the fear of the race deteriorations loomed large. As one article in the official local newspaper went. However desirable it is to acclimatize the tea shrubs here and free ourselves from the multi-million tribute that we pay to China for tea every year. It is nevertheless even more desirable to free ourselves from the necessity to acclimatize here the Chinese themselves. The author of this piece compared the Chinese with Hyloxera, a grape disease that devastates vineyards across Europe, Tsarist wine growing era being no exception. Nothing that it was still possible to fight the plant's pest, whereas one cannot read of the Chinese by any means. So basically, what this passage is trying to say that the bringing of the Chinese was preceded by the heated discussions about the practicability of such moves, which betray acute racialized concern among the Russian commentators. So, this says that in Russia, bringing the Chinese become the heated discussion because of the fear of the because of the fear of racialisms. The phantom of the yellow peril, well entrenched in the mindset of Sarah society at the turn of the century, and the fear of the race deteriorations loomed large. So it say that this passage say that in Sarah society's mindsets, there is the fear of deteriorations, racial deteriorations. What this called? What this means that means increasing in the number of the Chinese laborers. So it might be possible that there is the population of them is increased and there is a war situations because of the racisms created in Russia. As one article in the official local newspaper went, however desirable it is to acclimatize the tea shrubs here and free ourselves from the multi-million tribute that we pay to China for tea every year, it is nevertheless even more desirable to free ourselves from the necessity to acclimatize here the Chinese themselves. So, firstly, I just wanted to just give the meaning of acclimatize. What is acclimatize is? So acclimatize is basically make someone or something, but they make changes in different conditions of life or weather. So it says that in one of the local newspaper article, there it says that means it is desirable for the people to make the people of China make a whole area free from those Chinese peoples. And Add on to that, they also want to free themselves from the tea, because of tea they are paying lots of money to those people in the name of, not in the name of, because of a tea they are paying Chinese people lots of amount. Lots of portion of their income is goes to the Chinese people because of the tea. So they wanted to make themselves free from that. The author, the author of this piece compared the Chinese with the Hyloxera, a grape disease that devastated the vineyard across the Europe. Ceres wine growing era being no exception, nothing that it was still possible to fight the plant's pest, whereas one cannot read of the Chinese by any means. So, author is trying to say here is that Chinese in that particular era is like a grave disease which devastated the vineyard. Means they are like there, which means Chinese people in their locality is a kind of what we can say upset situations, means people are not happy. It's kind of a disease, but it says that it is possible to get rid from the disease, but it is not possible to get rid from the Chinese people by any means. Means no matter what they do, but still they are not able to get rid from them. So what the title of this passage here is that the point of view of Tsarist society's people about Chinese laborers. And what we can take from here is that acute racialized concern. First, we can take this, and the fear of a race deterioration loomed large. That we can take another thing, and desirable to free ourselves from the necessity to acclimatize here the Chinese themselves, to free themselves from this Chinese people, but it is they cannot one cannot get rid of this Chinese by any means. This line is also important. So let's moving toward the next species. The government was a latecomer to the tree plantation business in South Caucasus. In 1895, when Popov's workers were harvesting tea for the first time, it organized an expeditions to China, Japan, Ceylon, and the Himalayas to bring specimens of tea and other southern crops to the Russian Empire. As expeditions was off to the tropics, the Department of Crown Domains acquired nearly 17,500 hectares of land in Chakwa to establish a state-owned experimental and, as its title suggested, colonization estate, the main purpose of which was to receive, acclimatize, and grow exotic plants expected to be brought by the expedition. This venture resulted in astonishing success, turning the estate and eventually the vicinities of Batum in a cozy tropical landscape with vast plantation of tea, citrus trees, bamboo, loquat, Japanese persimmons, and many other exotic spices. By 1915, the Chakwa estate had the largest tea plantation, amounting to almost 550 hectares. Popper lagged behind with 140 hectares, while 200 private farmers together cultivate slightly more than 200 hectares. So, what this passage is saying, The government was a latecomer to the tree plantation business in South Caucasus. That before the government, this line says that before the government, some private organizations are trying to cultivate tea in South Caucasus. So what it says, like next. In 1895, when Popov's workers were harvesting tea for the first time, it organized an expedition to China, Japan, Kalen, and Himalayas to bring Himalayas to bring spices to tea and other southern crops to Russian Empire. So what this says that when in 1985, when the Popov's worker first time harvesting the tea, it was organized as an expedition to China, Japan, Kalen, and Himalayas to bring spicemen of tea and other southern crops to Russian Empire. So let's moving to the next line. As the expedition was off to the tropic, the Department of Crown Japan acquired nearly 500 hectares in land in Chakwa to establish a state-owned experimental and its title suggested colonization state, and the main purpose of which was to receive acclimatized grow exotic plants expected to be brought by the expeditions. So the first time when the Popop's workers harvest the tea, they just invite the people from China, Japan, Kalen and Himalayas to just bring the plants from their area to the Russian empires. And because of that, the Department of the Crown Domains acquired nearly 17,500 hectares of land in Chakwa to establish their own state experimental area, which is called as title as colonization estate, which means with the purpose of receive, acclimatize, and grow exotic plants means they need to create in that particular land, create the atmosphere, a climatic condition for the plantation of those exotic plants, which is brought by expeditions. This venture resulted in astonishing success, turning the estates and eventually the vicinities of Batum into a cozy tropical landscape with a vast plantation of citrus trees, bamboo, rockwood, Japanese persimmons, and many other exotic spices. Because of that experiment, now they are able to plant tea, citrus trees, bamboo, and many other exotic plants which is brought in by the different regions of China, Japan, Ceylon, and Himalayas. By 1915, the Chakwa estate had the largest tea plantations amounting almost 550 hectares. Pop-up lagged behind with 140 hectares, while the 200 private farmers together cultivated slightly more than 200 hectares. So it's a statistical result of plantation of the tea. So what the title of this whole is colonization estate in Chakwa. And what we can take from here is that organize an expedition to China, Japan, Kalen, and Himalayas to bring the spicemen of tea and other southern crops to the Russian Empire. And what the purpose here is that acclimatize and grow exotic plants expected to brought by the expeditions. Now the Chakra estate had the largest tea plantations that we can take. And let's moving towards the next species. In the 1890s, two botanical gardens, one in Sochi and one in Sukhum, were established, and then a decade later, experimental stations were added. There were few people in Russian Empire as obsessed with the tropic as the mastermind behind the letter's creation, Pavel Tatarinin. He traveled extensively. His dream about the tropical world took him to the South America, where he admired the marvels of the earthly paradise, but remonstrated that semi-civilized people were turning it into hell. He made a trip to Algeria to explore the experimental Jardin du Hamma and to the French Riviera, where he visited Villa Turret in Antibes, a botanical garden and acclimatization and research facility dealing with tropical plants. In conversation with the Tatarinov and later in separate essay, its director Charles Norden argued that the villa, inspired by the British experimental colonial garden, could in turn serve as model for similar institutions in Russia's southernmost positions. So what this passage is saying, in 1890s, two botanical gardens, one in Sochi and one in Sukhum, were established, and then a decade later, experimental stations were added. That in 1890s, the two botanical gardens in Sochi and Sukhum were established, but after decades, experimental stations were also established there. There were few people in Russian Empire obsessed with the tropics as the mastermind behind letters creation, Pav Terinen. That he is the person who obsessed about tropics in Russian Empire. He traveled extensively. His dream about the tropical world took him to South America, where he admired the marvels of the earthly paradise, but remonstrated that the semi-civilized peoples were turning it into hell. So he just travels in different parts of the world, but a tropical world. So he went to the South America, where just found in early marvels, and he just considered them as an earthly paradise. But there is a semi-civilized people who turned that place into hell. He made a trip to Algeria to explore the experimental Jardin du Hamma to the French Riviera, where he visited Villa Tourist in Antibes, a botanical garden and acclimatizations and research facility dealing with tropical plants. So in Algeria, he just went to the one of the villa where there is botanical gardens and acclimatizations where the research were happenings about the tropical plants. In conversation with Tatarinov and later in the separate essay, its director Charles Norden argued that the villa inspired by the British experimental colonial garden could in turn serve as model of similar institution in Russia's southernmost possessions. So the structure of villa is inspired by the garden, colonial garden, which model is similar to the institutions in Russia's southernmost possessions. So, what the title of this passage is Tatarinov's Obsessions and Visits. Yeah. What we can take from here is that He's a mastermind. The mastermind behind the lettuce creation in Russia. He's a person that he admired marvels, the earthly paradise, but demonstrated that semi-civilized people were turning it into hell. This we can take. And in Algeria, there is a botanical garden and acclimatizations and resource facility dealing with tropical plants. The villa is inspired by the British experimental colonial garden, could in turn serve as a model for the similar institution in Russia's southernmost possessions. That's all we can take from that passage. Just moving toward the next passage. How many passages are left? Confused. In 1885, Chatarinov took the most important decision of his life, purchasing land on the coast of Black Sea near Sukhum. There, he used his important skills to reproduce a tropical oasis in the open air, which turned into the most spectacular showcase of exotic vegetation on the whole coast. Tatarino envisaged turning the coastal part west and south of Caucasus Ridge into a nearly tropical realm, where the incoming settlers from the metropole would cultivate whimsical plants for aesthetic pleasure and the production of commodities. Inspired by the French, he spoke in favor of establishing experimental stations in Sochi, Sukhum, and as soon as it happened, he became the director of the latter. So, what this passage says that in 1885, Tatarum purchased a land in the coast of the Black Sea near the Sukhum, where he used his important skill to reproduce a tropical oasis in the open air, which turned into the most peculiar showcase for exotic vegetation in the whole coast. Means after inspiring from his visits to South America, he purchased own land in Sukhum, which is the near to the Black Sea. This is the coast of Black Sea near to Sukhum, sorry. And where he used all the experiment, whatever just he just inspired by the exotic plants experiments in South America, he started planting those exotic vegetation in his area, which he purchased in Black Sea. Tatanero envisaged turning the coastal part west and south of Caucasus Ridge into nearly tropical realm where incoming settlers from metropole could cultivate whimsical plants for aesthetic pleasure and the production of commodity. So the people who are just coming there as a settler, by inspiring by him, they can cultivate those whimsical plants for their aesthetic pleasures, and they can also just use that vegetations for their own purpose. Inspired by the French, he spoke in favor of establishing experimental stations in Sochi and Sukhum, and as soon as it happened, he became the director of the latter. So, by inspired by the French, he inspired the people in Sochi and Sukhum to establish experimental stations where they experiment with these tropical plants. And it's happened. And the resultant of that, he became the director of the latter. So, what the title of this particular passage is Tatarinov's experiment, or no, the Tataronov's director of the letter. This is the title of this thesis. And what we can take from here is that purchasing a land on the coast of Black Sea near the Sukhum, the first, reproduced the tropical oasis in the open air, which is turned out to be more spectacular showcase for exotic vegetation on the whole coast. And turning the coastal parts west and south of Caucasus range into nearly tropical realm. The incoming settler from metropole would cultivate whimsical plants for aesthetic pleasures and the production of commodity. Favored to establish experimental stations in Sochi and Sukhum, as we can take from here. So moving toward the next species, the reality betrayed expectations. However, debates over which kind of plant should be given preference ensued in forthcoming year. Many opt for many down-to-earth pursuits, such as introduction of traditional fruit, curls, and vegetables on the coastal zone of Russian colonization. Others insist that wasting the close to tropical condition to the region of plants of the temperate climate was unreasonable. More than a decade after the new director of the Sochi and the later Sukhum experimental station, Vasily Markowitz described the rivalry between the proponent of growing ordinary Russian plants and the supporter of the southern vegetation as a battle between cabbage and orange, arguing that where ananas, pineapple, and other exotic fruits grow, there cannot be room for the cabbage and potato. So this whole passage is about the debate over the kinds of plants need to be cultivated in that area, Sochi and Sukkot. So it says that many people opt for the down-to-earth pursuits such as introduction of the traditional fruits, curls and vegetables in coastal zone of Russian colonizations. Many people are in favor of this. And other insist that wasting the close to tropical condition in the region for plants of temperate climate is unreasonable. They said that that whole area is experimental area. They create the whole atmosphere for the exotic plant. So why they use then why to cultivate the traditional fruits which already comfortably in the Russian climate? So more than a decade after the new director of the Sochi and the later Sukhum experimental station, Vasily Markovich described the rivalry between the proponent of growing ordinary Russian plants and the supporter of the southern vegetations as a battle between cabbage and orange. So after the dilemma, after people are in this dilemma, after 10 years, the new director Vasily Markov described the rivalry between the Russian plants and the southwestern vegetable, means between a cabbage and orange. The argument is that where ananas, pineapple, and other exotic fruits will grow, there cannot be room for cabbage and potato. They say that if they are growing a Russian vegetable or plants along with this exotic plants, then where the other exotic plants we can grow? So the title of this whole passage is Debate between a preference of Russian plants over debate between a preference of Russian plants or southern vegetations. So what we can take from here is that many people opt for more down-to-earth introduction of traditional fruits, curls, vegetable, and coastal zone of Russian colonization. first, and on the another side, the plan for the temperature climate, peoples are in the favor of southern vegetations. But later it was that where ananas and other exotic foods grow, there cannot be the room for the cabbage and potatoes. This was the conclusion. No, the rest of the all the area is for the exotic plants. Moving toward the next species, which is quite longer and the second last species of today's video. The Tatarinovs would certainly agree. However, his quest for the Russian tropics could took him southwards. Disillusioned with not uncommon freezing, temperature, and snowfall of Sukhum's winter, he acquired a new estate near Batum in 1898, the climate of which seems a much better fit for his tropical garden. By the time Tatarinovs moved there, the region has already been recognized by the scholar as the Russian Empire's subtropical corner. No one else did more for this idea to take hold in imagination of Finde Sisley, Russia, than Andrei Krasnov, one of Russia's foremost scholarly experts in tropical flora. Krasnov was a member and the public face of the governmental tropical expedition of 1895. His resounding article, published the same year under the telling title The Russian Tropics, was meant to put the long-standing idea of the South Caucasus tropicality on a specific footing. Krasnov argued that the region with a tropical outlook, humid, winterless, and rich in rainfall, could be found far beyond the tropics themselves. Subtropical thus means tropical in most respects, save for the geographic one, with the warmest winter and the highest amount of precipitation in the Russian Empire. The red laterite soil and a number of indigenous evergreen plant species that form the undergrowth of local woods. The bottom region remind Krasnov of Java and Ceylon. What sets it apart, in his view, was the want of genuine exotic vegetation typical to the tropical rainforest, which had existed there in the prehistoric era but had mostly perished during the ice age. So this whole passage is about the area in Batam, the tropical area which is known as subtropical region of Russia. So what we can take from here is that the climate is which seems to be much better for tropical garden, subtropical corner of Russia firstly. The region with a tropical outlook, humid, winterless or rich in rainfall could be found far beyond the tropical themselves. This and subtropical means a tropical in most respects save of geographic one, with the warmest winter and the highest amount of precipitations in Russian Empire, red laterite soil and the number of indigenous evergreen species that form undergrowth of local woods that the wants of genuine exotic vegetation typical to tropical rainforests which had existed here in a prehistoric era but had mostly precipitated during the ices that we can take from here. So let's moving to the last passage of today's video. In his letter writing, Kransnov suggested correcting this historical injustice and restoring the region's appearance in its authentic tropical condition by reintroducing exotic plants from the global south. This endeavor underlined many activities of Chakwa estate in Batum region. Krasnov did not feel it was enough, arguing that the tropical transformation of the local environment could be achieved only with the help of botanical garden. The acclimatization institution similar to British colonial garden in India and the garden of Dutch Buitengens in Java, as Kansno wrote, would restore the prehistorical flora in the area and would facilitate the disseminations of tropical and subtropical plants along the coast so that the settler would be able to produce colonial commodities on the Russia's own home turf. So it's the title of this whole passage is Letter by Kransno. So what we can take from here, what he's trying to say that what his suggestion is that correcting the historical injustice, the restoring the reason of appearance is authentic tropical condition by reintroducing exotic plant from the global south. So what and another what we can say that restore the prehistorical flora in the area and would facilitate the dissemination of tropical and subtropical along the coast and produce colonial commodities on the Russians' old home turf that we can take. So as with that, let's end the video here. Hope you guys like it and see you guys tomorrow with the another series of this case. As of now, have a great day.